Now, this comes off a landmark report. It's going to be published on Wednesday. It's found that people in the northeast of England are much more likely to die earlier, have poorer health, and also be unemployed compared to their counterparts in the south. Now, according to State of Aging 2023 report, the life expectancy of men in the most deprived parts of the northeast of England is 73.5 years, so 73 and a half. So for men in the most affluent parts of the country, the life expectancy is 83.2 years. It was a decade difference. Now for women, the difference is 78.3 versus 86.3 years. It's a drastic difference between the two. Suzan, what do you make of this? I mean, we talk about the north-south divide, and sometimes we talk about, well, infrastructure and things. But the life expectancy is huge.
It's shocking. And I can't, for the life of me, kind of work out, as a Midlander who lives near Manchester and who comes to London a lot for work, I can't, I'm fairly insulted generally by the whole levelling up terminology.
Sure. Because
I kind of think, well, what are we levelling up? It's not as though the South is some sort of utopian kind of idyll, which I don't find it, actually. I like coming down here, but I'm always quite relieved to go north, where there's kind of more space and you can kind of, chat to people a bit more easily. And I actually find places that I go to. I went to Liverpool the other day. It's fantastic. I don't know what people in the South think of the North, but it's actually really great quite a lot of the time. But obviously, I think one of the big problems we've got with the whole levelling up issue, I looked on the government website and there were just as many projects down south as there were up north. So I'm not quite on their levelling up page. So I didn't really understand that. And also, I think the whole bidding war for what you need, that's a big problem. Councils spend billions and billions trying to get these projects and the money in. And I think that's a big issue.
So the study says that the contributing factors, the disparities, and particularly they've looked at the northeast and the southeast, include things like wealth, working conditions, public transport, high-speed internet, educational and lifestyle factors. So it's a wealth of factors that contribute to men in the northeast living 10 years fewer than men in the southeast. James, I was a bit shocked by this.
I think, depending on how one cuts the numbers, inevitably you end up with some probably quite harsh conclusions. I think to say, have the Tories let down Northerners is just a nonsense. But I think, has the nation forgotten that different parts of the country will inevitably move at different speeds? So, for example, when we saw the huge change in direction, started in the 60s, but, proliferated in the 70s, accelerated in the 80s, when we started to see the change of what people did and the jobs, and then we started to see also the change in social health. And you have a look at the smoking stats as to who gave up smoking first and how that was brought in, and then the sorts of ways in which we brought in different kinds of exercise, and then how we took away playing fields from schools up and down the country. All sorts of things that we've done that contribute to this. So what we should be doing is, instead of saying, oh, this levelling up agenda, I think I agree with you, I think it's a little bit of a nonsense.
Yeah.
But I think what we've got a nation that is moving at different speeds depending on where you are, and also depending upon the sorts of attitudes sometimes of the local council and the provision. So if people are doing more exercise, they're eating healthier, they're having access to...
But you have to kind of generally...
But you have to ask why. When you're saying people are eating healthier or they're doing more exercise, you have to ask why. If the infrastructure is not there for people to do that, then perhaps the government in Westminster, whoever they may be, just so happens the Conservatives have been in power for the last 13 years, are not providing all the things that we know have been affecting this age gap.
Yeah, but if you're talking about age gap, though, you're talking about what people were doing 30, 40, 50 years ago in terms of their jobs. So No, but if you're...
But you have to take into account that they're saying that if you are old and in the north, and particularly in the northeast, you're likely to have worse health conditions.
Yes. But that's because of what happened to you 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Not necessarily.
Probably.
But you're saying probably, but not necessarily. Though.
Well, look, if you were doing a factory job that had, terrible air in it, or you were going down the pits and the mines, or if you were doing a job where everybody smoked and you were surrounded by everybody who was smoking, and maybe you didn't have the lifestyles that perhaps we have today, which encourage you to, walk and get out and exercise, and again, look, money's going to come into it in terms of your access to being able to eat well, cook well,
be looked after, get the right social care.
So there are a lot of things here. So I think you could depoliticise it and work out, well, how do we improve people's life expectancy? Because I think we'll also find that probably in 20, 30 years' time, it will flip reverse. Because I think, as you say, you go north and the space and people's focus on what they do now is completely different.
Before we go to the lines, one more thing I need to tell you from this this study, which actually relates to what we were talking about, pensioners. The number of pensioners living in poverty has steadily increased since 2012, from 13% to 18% now. And also people aged between 60 and 64 have, and I quote from the study, the highest poverty rates among adults of any age. So it's the older people that are suffering the most. Let's take a couple of your calls. Claire in West Yorkshire. Claire, I mean, James doesn't think so. Have the Tories been responsible for this increase between the discrepancy and certainly life expectancy between the north and the south?
Absolutely, I really do think so. Unfortunately, in the area where I am up in Kirklees in West Yorkshire, we've been let down incredibly. In our local area alone, there's at least 4 leisure centres that are closing down due to lack of funding. We've also got nursing homes that have specialist care for people who have got Alzheimer's and things like that, and they're all closing down. And again, it's, they're doing silly things like putting up light displays in Huddersfield, but they won't pay for, our leisure and sports centres, which a lot of elderly people use to go swimming and do their exercises and things like that and get out and socialise. They're not doing. They're closing them down.
James is shaking his head.
I'm shaking my head, but
I need to address. Go on, address Claire then.
But Claire, I suppose the question is, who's taking these decisions? Is it taken by your local authority, or is it being taken by the government? Because I would say that because we've over-politicised it, we've forgotten who takes the decision. So if a local authority isn't funding things correctly and you haven't got your leisure centres, or if your local area isn't getting the funding it needs, it means that your local authority isn't doing its job properly. So if they're putting up lights and they're shutting down leisure centres, that's nothing to do with the government. And if your MP isn't fighting for you, then frankly, you vote them out.
It was brought up in Westminster the other day about the in Kirklees, about how we have been let down. And they're now wanting to introduce car parking charges into, our town centres as well, things like that, which, again, it's going to cost more money.
Well, we all have to pay for those.
OK, but James,
you don't actually in quite a lot of the rest of the country. And actually, when you do bring those in, she's quite right. What it does is damage the town and how much it's used. And somewhere like Macclesfield, for instance, it really needs regeneration at the moment because people aren't going in. And the more you put up the car parking charges, the more it puts people off. But actually, you're right about the local authorities having to make the decisions. But sometimes they do have to bid to government to get some of the funding, and that's part of the problem.
And I would agree with that.
The decision is being made not by the people
and
there.
It's slow and cumbersome.
But also we know that government funding for local authorities has dropped. They're getting less money. And they have to do more things like social care, all those things. The biggest budget of local authorities goes in looking after people. So I'm not surprised when Claire says that their local leisure centres and their gyms are being cut because that money is used for elsewhere.
But is it any better in London? I know an awful lot of people who can't get a doctor's appointment who aren't being given the right social care, and they're in London.
Yeah.
OK, Claire, thank you for your call. Great one to kick us off. Let's move on to Louise. Again, from up north in Manchester. Louise, welcome to the show. Good afternoon. What would you like to say? Do you think the Tories have let Northerners down?
I do, yeah. Basically, just picking up on a point that Claire said there, our leisure centres, libraries, things like that, are all being cut. We cannot access those. We also have issues with child poverty. There's people I know that are children that are going hungry because we haven't got the funds to send our children to these leisure centres. And these was all free for everybody. And they're all shutting down now. And in regards to healthcare as well, we just don't get the healthcare up here that we would get if we probably was in London. There's just there's just no, funding from the Tories. And I've lived in my property now for 17 years. And when I got in this property, it was under Labour government. And when I would ask for repairs to be done, they were done. And since the Tories have took over, I am currently living now in a house that is dripping rain through the bathroom, all coming down to the bottom. And I have to wait till February for a roofer to come out because there's just no body available, all the funds available to help us get the repairs done.
Your infrastructure, your social infrastructure around you seems to be crumbling. Louise, thank you for that call. You were shaking your head.
Well, I agree with everything Louise says in as much as she's described a situation that is obviously real and it's obviously very difficult. But I don't think she's describing a situation that's actually exclusive to the Manchester area where she lives, unfortunately. Yeah. And that's a terrible thing. But I happen to know that, obviously the health care you can get in the Manchester area is actually second to none. My husband has just been to the Christie Hospital in Manchester. It's a fabulous place. There's incredible things all over the country. But what she's describing, I think you can go into places in the south as well that have exactly the same issues.
OK, let's take one more call from Manchester. Caroline, good afternoon. What would you like to say, Caroline? Have the Conservatives let down the Northerners?
Absolutely. The first thing they did when they got into power was put in place austerity. And whether we like it or not, that meant that they cut all of the programmes that were in place, that Labour put in place to try and reduce health inequalities, to make decent homes, to improve our schools, to improve social care and to improve health. The next thing they did was cut all the best value performance indicators, so they didn't monitor it. Then they started to cut the budget. And Labour councils were disproportionately affected by those cuts. The cuts were deeper, harder and faster. And therefore, all they did was increase the problems that had been there for a long, long time that were gradually being sorted under the previous administration.
Okay.
So with all due respect, yes, Christie's might be great, but the reality is it's grim up north.